never thought my own daughter would destroy me in front of hundreds of people. At her MBA graduation, Sarah looked me in the eye and said, "And to my father, who achieved absolutely nothing in life, thank you for showing me exactly what I never want to become." The audience laughed. My ex-wife laughed. My daughter laughed. I slipped away before anyone could see my tears, a broken man in a worn librarian's suit. But what Sarah didn't know as she humiliated me that day was that the loser who achieved nothing had just bought her company for $50 million. The tech startup, she bragged, would make her Silicon Valley royalty, where she once said she might pay me to mop floors, now belonged to me. Monday morning would change everything. After 15 years of being erased from her life, my daughter would finally have to acknowledge my existence. But was I seeking revenge, or something much deeper that both of us had forgotten? Follow this channel for more heartbreaking true stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, forgiveness, and the quiet power of those society overlooks. Like and comment to let me know where you're watching from, and share your thoughts on what you would do in my situation. I never imagined that the most humiliating moment of my life would happen on what should have been her happiest day. My daughter, Sarah, was graduating with highest honors from her MBA program at a prestigious California university. I'd traveled there alone by bus, because I'd sold my last rare books to buy the ticket. As I sat in the back row of that grand auditorium, wearing my worn librarian's suit, the only decent clothes I still owned, I silently prayed she might at least glance in my direction. The ceremony was everything you'd expect from such an institution: polished speeches, gleaming faces, and the constant clicking of expensive cameras capturing perfect moments for perfect families. I sat motionless, a gray-haired ghost among celebrating strangers, clutching a small wrapped gift I'd brought for her, a first edition of her childhood favorite book that had somehow survived my financial collapse. When Sarah was called to give her valedictorian speech, my chest swelled with a pride I hadn't felt in years. She looked stunning, confident, powerful in ways I never was. Her voice carried across the hall with authority as she thanked her professors, her mentors, her mother, her stepfather, the man who'd replaced me when I was deemed insufficient. Then came the moment that still echoes in my nightmares. "And to my father," she said, her voice suddenly shifting as she scanned the crowd. I straightened in my seat, my heart racing. Did she see me? Who achieved absolutely nothing in life? The audience grew quiet. "Thank you for showing me exactly what I never want to become." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not nervous laughter, genuine, hearty laughter. I watched as my ex-wife covered her mouth, shoulders shaking with amusement. The university dean chuckled appreciatively. "And Sarah?" She smiled. That same smile she had as a little girl when she'd build sandcastles with me at the beach. Except now, it wasn't for me. It was at my expense. In that moment, something inside me cracked open. Not my heart, that had broken years ago when the courts deemed me non-essential to my daughter's upbringing. No, what cracked was the shell I'd built around myself, the one that had convinced me I deserved this treatment. I lowered my head and slipped out before the lights came up, before anyone could see the tears streaming down my weathered face. Nobody noticed me leave, not even her. The small wrapped package remained on my empty seat, forgotten like its giver. Outside, the California sunshine felt obscenely bright. Students and families flooded the courtyard, hugging, taking photos, celebrating futures so bright they needed designer sunglasses. I sat on a bench watching them from behind my drugstore readers, wondering how many fathers in that crowd had also been reduced to punchlines in their children's success stories. That's when my phone buzzed. An ancient flip phone I kept because I couldn't afford anything better. A text from an unfamiliar number. "The Luminary acquisition is complete. Paperwork finalized. Monday morning announcement as planned." I stared at those words, feeling something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. The irony of timing wasn't lost on me. As I sat there, humiliated and discarded, the wheels I'd set in motion months ago were turning. Unstoppable now. Sarah's company, the tech startup she bragged would make her Silicon Valley royalty, the one where she said she might one day pay me to mop the floors, had just been acquired by my investment group for $50 million, and she had absolutely no idea who was behind it. I laughed then, a strange, hollow sound that startled a passing family. They hurried their children away from the weird old man laughing to himself on a bench. I couldn't blame them. I must have looked deranged. this shabby-suited senior citizen cackling in the middle of a graduation celebration. But sometimes, life presents you with moments so perfectly, painfully ironic that laughter is the only sane response. On Monday morning, Sarah would discover that her company, her precious luminary, now belonged to a mysterious holding company. And someday, perhaps, she would learn that the loser who achieved nothing had achieved the ultimate revenge. Or was it redemption I was after? Even I wasn't sure anymore. What I did know was that for the first time in 15 years, my daughter would have to acknowledge my existence, and that was worth more than $50 million could ever buy. After the divorce, when Sarah was only 10 years old, my ex-wife, Melissa, cut all ties between us. She claimed I was a bad influence, a man without ambition, a library rat who would never provide a future for our daughter. The court sided with her, not because I was unfit, but because I couldn't afford the kind of lawyer who could combat her narrative. The last time I saw Sarah as a child, she was clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a tattered rabbit I'd given her on her 5th birthday. She stood in our driveway watching as I loaded my few possessions into a friend's truck. "When are you coming back, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small against the December wind. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I straightened her wool hat. "I'll always be here for you, sunshine. Always." It was a promise I intended to keep, but one that circumstances and Melissa made impossible. Within 6 months, Melissa had married Richard Harmon, a real estate developer whose annual Christmas card showed them in exotic locations: the Maldives, Santorini, the Swiss Alps. In each photo, Sarah grew taller, her smile more practiced, her resemblance to her mother more pronounced. My child support checks were cashed promptly, but my letters were returned unopened, my calls went straight to voicemail, and eventually, my visitation rights were temporarily suspended, due to what Melissa's lawyer called pattern of emotional instability. The judge, a golf buddy of Richard's, agreed that it would be best for Sarah to have consistency in her life. Consistency, apparently, meant erasing me completely. I returned to the library where I'd worked for 20 years. The familiar smell of aging paper and wood polish became my comfort, the silent corridors my refuge. During lunch breaks, I'd sit in the rare book section, surrounded by first editions and forgotten memoirs, and write letters to Sarah that I knew she'd never read. Today I found a book about constellations that reminded me of how we used to lie on the grass and find shapes in the stars. I wrote once, "I wonder if you still remember the story of Cassiopeia, the queen who was punished for her pride." As the years passed, I watched Sarah grow up through fragments: school newspaper clippings where she was mentioned as debate team captain, social media posts that mutual friends occasionally shared, local news items about academic achievements. She graduated high school with honors, attended Stanford on scholarship, and eventually entered their prestigious MBA program. Each milestone was a dagger of pride and pain, proud of who she was becoming, devastated that I wasn't there to witness it. When Sarah was 16, I discovered a folder of her childhood writings in a box I'd never fully unpacked. Among them was an essay titled "My Hero" from her 3rd grade class. "My dad is my hero because he takes care of books like they're people," she'd written in careful cursive. "He says every book has a soul, and when we read them, we keep them alive. When I grow up, I want to take care of things the way he does." I framed that essay and hung it in my small apartment, a reminder of who I once was in her eyes before Melissa rewrote our history. Meanwhile, I continued my quiet life among the books. One regular patron was an elderly man named Henry McCall, a reclusive author whose works had fallen out of favor decades ago. He came every Tuesday, requesting obscure references for research, though he hadn't published in years. We developed a friendship of sorts, two forgotten men finding comfort in literature and quiet conversation. "They'll remember me when I'm dead," McCall often joked, his arthritic fingers tracing the spines of his own out-of-print novels on our shelves. That's how it always goes with writers. Irrelevance, then death, then a magnificent rediscovery. I didn't know then how prophetic his words would be, nor how they would change my life. When McCall died at 93, I was the only person at his funeral besides the cemetery staff. 3 weeks later, his attorney contacted me. McCall had left me something in his will, not money, but the complete rights to his literary works. "He said you'd care for them properly," the lawyer explained, handing me the paperwork. I accepted the inheritance as a final courtesy to my friend, expecting nothing. Then 6 months later, A prominent film director announced his next project would adapt McCall's first novel. Suddenly, publishing houses were scrambling for reprint rights. McCall's backlist became gold, and I, the unlikeliest of literary executors, found myself negotiating deals worth millions. By the time Sarah entered her final year of business school, I had quietly amassed a fortune. But I remained in my modest apartment, kept my job at the library, and told no one of my changed circumstances. Not even Sarah, who by then had been thoroughly convinced by her mother and stepfather that I was nothing but a cautionary tale, the failed man she should strive never to become. What would be the point? In her mind, I was already defined, a loser, a nobody, a man who achieved nothing. And perhaps that's exactly what I needed to be for what would come next. I never intended to use my newfound wealth as a weapon. For nearly a year after the McCall rights began generating income, I simply watched the money accumulate in accounts I rarely checked. The library remained my sanctuary, and my routine stayed unchanged. Every morning I'd still stop at Mabel's Corner Cafe for a $2.50 black coffee, nodding to the same familiar faces who had no idea that the shabby librarian in the corner could buy the entire building if he wanted. The irony wasn't lost on me. After decades of struggling to make rent payments, I now had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Yet the wealth felt hollow, meaningless, without anyone to share it with. Sometimes at night, I'd sit on my balcony overlooking the city lights, wondering if Sarah was out there somewhere, perhaps struggling financially as a student. The thought of her worrying about tuition or rent while I sat on millions was a special kind of torture. That's when fate intervened in the form of my old college roommate, David Chen. We'd kept in sporadic contact over the years, Christmas cards and occasional emails. He'd gone into investment banking while I chose books, and our paths had diverged accordingly. But when McCall's estate required financial management, David was the only person I trusted. It was during one of our meetings at his downtown office that he mentioned Luminary, a tech startup making waves in Silicon Valley. "It's a fascinating company," David said, sliding a glossy brochure across his mahogany desk. "They're developing AI solutions for healthcare, very cutting edge. The market's bullish on them," but he lowered his voice, though we were alone. "Between us, their financials are a mess. They're burning through capital with no sustainable revenue model. Classic Silicon Valley smoke and mirrors." I was only half listening until I flipped the brochure page and froze. There, listed as Director of Strategic Expansion, was Sarah Harmon, my Sarah, smiling confidently in a professional headshot, her mother's eyes staring back at me. "You know someone there?" David asked, noticing my reaction. My throat tightened. "My daughter," I managed to say. "She works there." David's expression shifted to concern. "Jim, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, tell me more about their financial situation," I interrupted, unable to take my eyes off Sarah's photo. The picture David painted over the next hour was troubling. Luminary projected a public image of success and innovation, but internally they were months away from collapse. The executive team was spending recklessly, the business model was fundamentally flawed, and investors were beginning to whisper about pulling out. "And Sarah?" I asked. "What's her role in all this?" David shrugged. "Director of Strategic Expansion is usually a role focused on new markets, partnerships. She might not even know how bad things are. The C-suite keeps that information close." As I left David's office that evening, a plan began forming in my mind. Not revenge. I'd never wanted to hurt Sarah, but perhaps an intervention. A way to protect her from the inevitable crash while teaching her something about value, about substance over style. Lessons her stepfather's world of appearance and status couldn't provide. 2 weeks later, I established Aurora Capital, a private holding company with myself as the sole owner. Hidden behind layers of corporate structure, David helped arrange a meeting with Luminary's desperate CEO, who practically wept with relief at my offer to inject emergency capital into the failing company. "There are conditions," I said, sitting across from him in a conference room I'd rented for the occasion. I wore a suit for the first time in years, feeling like an imposter despite the money behind me. Complete reorganization, financial transparency, and absolute confidentiality about the identity of Aurora's principal investor. The CEO, a 30-something man with expensive hair and a hollow confidence, nodded eagerly. Of course, whatever you need." "One more thing," I added, sliding a specific clause across the table. This employee, Sarah Harmon, remains untouched in any restructuring. Her position is guaranteed. He skimmed the document, eyebrow raised. She's good. One of our best, actually. But is there a particular reason? My reasons are my own, I replied, surprised by the authority in my voice. Those are my terms. The contracts were signed the following day. I was now effectively the owner of my daughter's professional future, and she had no idea. The irony wasn't lost on me. Melissa had taken Sarah from me because I supposedly couldn't provide for her, and now I secretly controlled the company she believed would make her career. It was during this time that Olivia entered my life. She was a regular at the library, always requesting books on botanical illustration. Soft-spoken with silver-streaked dark hair, she reminded me of fall leaves and second chances. We began with conversations about rare plant monographs and gradually moved to coffee at Mabel's. Unlike everyone else in my orbit, Olivia knew the truth. All of it. About McCall, about the money, about Sarah, about Aurora Capital. She listened without judgment as I unfolded my complicated plan. "You know you're playing with fire," she said one evening as we walked through the park near my apartment. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and possibilities. What if she discovers it's you? What if this backfires? I watched a red leaf spiral down from a maple tree, thinking of how Sarah used to collect them as a child, pressing them between book pages. Maybe it will, I admitted, but I've spent 15 years as a ghost in her life. At least this way I'm doing something, even if she never knows it was me. Olivia stopped walking and turned to face me. "Jim, at some point, you'll need to tell her who you are now. Not just the father she rejected, but the man you've become." I couldn't meet her eyes. She needs to recognize who I was first, the value of what she discarded, before she can appreciate anything else. As I lay awake that night, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. Was this about protecting Sarah or proving something to her? Was I any better than Melissa, manipulating circumstances from behind the scenes? But when I received the invitation to Sarah's MBA graduation ceremony, sent, I suspected, as an afterthought or perhaps even a deliberate taunt, I knew there was no turning back. Our paths were set on a collision course, and for better or worse, I had signed a contract with destiny that would change both our lives forever. The morning after Sarah's graduation, I watched the sunrise from my hotel room window. The sky turned from navy to lavender to a brilliant orange, much like the sunrises Sarah and I used to watch together when she was little. She would sit on my shoulders, pointing at the colors and making up stories about sky painters working through the night. Those memories felt like they belonged to another man's life now. I checked out early, avoiding the cheerful families in the lobby still celebrating their graduates' achievements. My phone buzzed with a message from David. "Everything set for 9 a.m. announcement. Are you sure about this?" I typed back a simple yes and boarded my flight back to San Francisco. By the time I landed, the business world was already buzzing with the news. Aurora Capital acquires struggling tech darling Luminary in surprise $50 million deal. The financial press was speculating wildly about Aurora's intentions, the identity of its principals, and what this meant for Luminary's much-hyped AI healthcare platform. I took a taxi directly to Aurora's newly established offices in a sleek downtown building. David had arranged everything. The space, the staff, the carefully crafted corporate identity that revealed nothing of the man behind it. As I walked through the glass doors wearing a suit that Olivia had insisted I purchase for the occasion, a receptionist I'd never met greeted me by name. "Mr. Wilson, the team is waiting for you in the conference room." It was strange being addressed with such deference after decades of near invisibility. The executive assistant who guided me through the office spoke in hushed, respectful tones, explaining the day's schedule as if I were accustomed to such treatment. In truth, I felt like an imposter, playing a role in some elaborate theater production. The conference room held a team of lawyers, financial advisors, and corporate restructuring specialists, all hired by David, all unaware of my true connection to Luminary. They stood as I entered, these polished professionals with their expensive watches and practiced smiles. How different they were from the librarians and book lovers who had been my colleagues for decades. "We've prepared statements for the Luminary staff," a PR consultant explained, sliding documents across the table. "The first phase of restructuring will begin immediately. Senior management has been notified of mandatory meetings throughout the day." I scanned the schedule. Sarah's name was there, slotted for 2 p.m. "Has there been any response from the Luminary team?" I asked. trying to keep my voice neutral. A young woman with a tablet nodded. Social media monitoring shows considerable activity, sir, particularly from Director Harmon. She's been quite vocal. She turned her tablet toward me. Sarah's private Instagram account was filled with furious posts. Some faceless corporate vultures just swooped in to save us. Translation: strip everything valuable and fire everyone who matters. Another read: looking forward to meeting the genius investors who think they understand what we've built. Turned corporate bloodsuckers, turned fighting back. I suppressed a smile. She had her mother's fire, that was certain. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork. I approved the dismissal of Luminary's CEO and CFO, both of whom had been draining company resources with extravagant salaries and perks while their employees worked overtime without compensation. I reviewed the company financials in detail, shocked at the recklessness with which they'd burned through venture capital. It was no wonder they'd been on the verge of collapse. At 1:45, I stepped into the private office that had been prepared for me. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, furnishings that probably cost more than my annual librarian's salary, and not a single book. I missed my library desperately in that moment. The comforting smell of paper, the gentle quiet, the feeling of being surrounded by stories rather than corporate ambition. "She's here," David said, poking his head in. "Are you ready for this?" Was I ready to face my daughter after 15 years of absence? After hearing her publicly mock my life's work? After secretly taking control of her professional future? Of course not, but I nodded anyway. "Remember," David advised, "she doesn't know who you are. As far as she's concerned, you're just James Wilson, principal investor of Aurora Capital." "I remember," I replied quietly. Sarah entered like a storm. She wore a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, her expression a mask of controlled fury. She was followed by my executive assistant and Olivia, who had insisted on being present for moral support, though Sarah had no idea who she was. "Ms. Harmon," I said, rising from behind the desk, "thank you for coming." She didn't shake my extended hand. "Let's skip the pleasantries. I want to know what your game is. You buy a company you clearly know nothing about, fire our leadership, and expect the rest of us to just fall in line?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Please, sit. I prefer to stand." I sat back down, studying her face. Up close, I could see more clearly the little girl I'd lost, the determined set of her jaw when she was angry, the slight furrow between her brows that appeared when she was trying to solve a problem. My heart ached with the strange duality of knowing her so intimately and being a complete stranger to her. "Luminary was 3 months from bankruptcy," I said calmly. "Your CEO was spending investor money on personal expenses. Your technology, while promising, has fundamental flaws that need addressing before it can be viable." Her expression faltered slightly. "That's not true." I slid a folder across the desk. Financial reports, technical assessments, employee satisfaction surveys. The company was rotting from the inside, Ms. Harmon. She opened the folder, her face paling as she scanned the contents. I could see the exact moment when doubt crept in, when her certainty began to crumble. "I'm not here to destroy Luminary," I continued. "I'm here to save it, to make it what it should have been all along. A company that values substance over appearance, that prioritizes integrity over image." Sarah looked up, her eyes narrowing. "And what would you know about integrity, Mr. Wilson? Men like you buy and sell companies like trading cards. You'd be surprised what I know about value, Ms. Harmon. About seeing worth where others don't. About patience." She closed the folder with a snap. "So what happens now? You want to save the company from old lunatics with too much money? Is that your plan?" I almost smiled at her choice of words, so similar to what she'd said about me at graduation. Instead, I nodded to Olivia, who stepped forward with another folder. "This contains your new employment contract," I explained. "Your position is secure. In fact, I'm proposing an expanded role for you in the restructured organization." Sarah took the folder but didn't open it. "Why me? Why not fire everyone?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Let's just say I see potential in you that perhaps others have overlooked." She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then she placed the folder on my desk, unopened. "I need time to think about this." I nodded. "Of course, take all the time you need." As she turned to leave, Olivia handed her one more envelope, the one containing Sarah's childhood essay about her librarian father being her hero. Sarah glanced at it, confused, then tucked it under her arm without opening it. After she left, Olivia looked at me with gentle concern. "She didn't recognize you at all?" "No," I said quietly, staring at the door my daughter had just walked through. "She didn't." And somehow that hurt more than her graduation speech ever could. The days following my first encounter with Sarah passed in a strange haze. I continued my double life. James Wilson, the mysterious investor, by day, and Jim Edwards, the humble librarian, by night. The familiar rhythm of cataloging books and helping patrons grounded me, kept me from losing myself in the surreal corporate world I'd entered. "Mr. Samuels needs help finding materials on Byzantine architecture again," my colleague Martha whispered as I arrived for my evening shift. "He asked specifically for you." I nodded gratefully, welcoming the normalcy of the request. As I guided the elderly architecture professor through our collection, I found myself wondering what Sarah was doing at that exact moment. Had she opened the envelope Olivia gave her? Had she recognized her own childhood handwriting? The answer came the following morning when Olivia called me at home. "She's taken a leave of absence," Olivia said, her voice tight with concern. "Human Resources just processed the paperwork. Medical leave effective immediately." My stomach clenched. "Is she sick?" "The form doesn't specify, but David had her followed." "He did what?" I interrupted, suddenly angry. "It was my suggestion," Olivia admitted. "I was worried about her reaction to the envelope. Jim, she was seen sitting in her car for hours yesterday in the parking lot of Pinewood Elementary School." The name hit me like a physical blow. Pinewood, where Sarah had attended 1st through 3rd grade, where we'd had father-daughter breakfasts every month, where I'd volunteered to read to her class, bringing the library's most treasured picture books for special story times. "Did she say anything to anyone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No, but one of the teachers recognized her from when she was a student there. Apparently Sarah asked if she could see the library. She spent about an hour inside, then left without explanation." I sank into my worn armchair, the morning sunlight casting long shadows across my apartment floor. What was happening in Sarah's mind? Had the essay in that envelope triggered something, some forgotten memory, some crack in the narrative she'd been fed about me? "There's more," Olivia continued. "Your ex-wife has been trying to reach you." "Well, James Wilson. She's called the office 3 times demanding a meeting about her daughter's position." I laughed hollowly. 15 years of silence, and now Melissa wants to talk. "What do you want me to tell her?" I considered this for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeam cutting across my living room. The same sunbeam illuminated a framed photograph on my bookshelf, the only picture of Sarah I'd kept visible all these years. 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, holding up a drawing of what she called our castle, really just our modest home before the divorce. "Send her this," I said finally. "Just this and nothing else." That evening I emailed Olivia the scan of a yellowed piece of paper, Melissa's goodbye note from 15 years ago, the one where she'd written that I would never be more than a mediocre man, and that she deserved someone who could reach for the stars instead of hiding among dusty books. The note she'd left on the kitchen table the day she took Sarah and walked out of my life. I knew it was petty, perhaps even cruel, but something inside me couldn't bear the thought of Melissa waltzing into my office, still controlling the narrative, still convinced she'd made the right choice in erasing me from our daughter's life. That night, sleep evaded me entirely. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Sarah sitting alone in her elementary school library. What had she been looking for? Validation? Memories? Some trace of the father she'd been taught to despise? Olivia's question from weeks ago haunted me. Do you want her to admire you? Or love you? I didn't know anymore. Perhaps I never had. Morning brought a text from David. Spoke with head of HR. Sarah's official medical leave reason. Acute stress reaction. Request came with doctor's note. Approved for 30 days. I dragged myself through my library shift that day, mechanically shelving books and answering questions. My mind was elsewhere, with a little girl who once loved library story time, who thought her father hung the moon simply because he treated books with respect. With the woman that girl had become sitting alone in a school parking lot, perhaps questioning everything she'd been told. During my lunch break, I slipped away to a quiet corner of the rare books room and pulled out my wallet. Behind my driver's license was a folded, much-handled drawing, Sarah's castle. I'd carried it every day since Melissa left, a talisman of sorts, a reminder of who I once was in my daughter's eyes. The castle had crooked windows and an impossibly tall tower, with a stick figure of me standing beside it holding a book. My dad's castle was written in wobbly letters across the top. I remembered the day she'd drawn it, after I'd read her The Little Prince for the first time. She'd been fascinated by the idea that something small and ordinary could contain entire worlds inside. "Your library is like a castle full of treasure," she'd said, presenting me with the drawing, "and you're the king who protects it all." I carefully refolded the drawing and returned it to my wallet. As I did, my phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. Melissa came to the office. I showed her the note as instructed. She left without saying a word. Good, I thought, with a vindictiveness that surprised me. Let her sit with that memory for a while. But later that night, as I walked home from the library through the gentle spring rain, I wondered if I was becoming exactly what Sarah accused me of being at her graduation. A bitter, vengeful old man with nothing to show for his life but grudges. Olivia was waiting on my doorstep when I arrived home, sheltered under the small overhang, a folder clutched to her chest. "What's wrong?" I asked, hurrying to unlock the door. Once inside, she handed me the folder. "Security footage from Luminary's offices. I thought you should see this." The video showed Sarah entering the building late at night, using her access card. She went directly to Olivia's office where the lights were off, the space empty. She stood there for several minutes, as if waiting for something. Then she placed something on the desk, a small object I couldn't make out, and left. "What did she leave?" I asked. Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pressed flower, a forget-me-not, its delicate blue petals still visible despite being flattened and dried. "There was an envelope too," Olivia said softly, with a question written on it. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs. "What did it say?" "Do you still have my castle drawing?" Olivia's eyes met mine, filled with gentle understanding. "She's remembering, Jim. She's starting to see through the cracks." I stared at the tiny flower in my palm, remembering another spring day long ago, when Sarah and I had planted forget-me-nots in our small garden. "These are magic flowers," I'd told her. "As long as they bloom, we'll never forget each other." "What do I do now?" I whispered, more to myself than to Olivia. She touched my arm gently. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding. Time to let her see you. The real you. Not the villain her mother created. Not the mysterious businessman you're pretending to be." I closed my fingers around the flower, feeling its fragility, its persistence despite everything. Just like the memories that Sarah seemed to be rediscovering despite years of being told to forget. "Not yet," I said finally. "She needs to find her way back on her own terms. I won't push." But as Olivia left and I stood alone in my quiet apartment, I removed the castle drawing from my wallet and placed it beside the forget-me-not on my nightstand. For the first time in 15 years, I dared to hope that my daughter might be looking for her way home. 2 weeks into Sarah's medical leave, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called an all-hands meeting at Luminary, the first company-wide gathering since the acquisition. The official purpose was to outline the new vision for the restructured organization, but my true motivation was far more personal. I stood backstage in the company's sleek cafeteria, now transformed into a makeshift auditorium. Through a gap in the curtain, I could see the employees filing in, young, anxious faces wondering about their futures. David stood beside me, scrolling through the presentation on his tablet. "Are you sure about this?" he asked for perhaps the 10th time that morning. "It's not too late to send the PR team instead." I straightened my tie, still an unfamiliar sensation after decades in casual librarian attire. "I'm sure." What I didn't tell him was that I'd received word from HR that Sarah had requested to attend the meeting despite still being on medical leave. She was out there right now, somewhere in that crowd of uncertain faces. My daughter, coming to see what the mysterious James Wilson had to say. My hands trembled slightly as I reviewed my notes. I'd practiced this speech for days, carefully crafting each word, not as the corporate raider they all expected, but as the man I truly was. Someone who valued substance over flash, dedication over self-promotion, quiet competence over loud ambition. 2 minutes, the event coordinator whispered, adjusting my microphone. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Through the curtain gap, I searched the crowd trying to spot Sarah. And then I saw her, sitting alone in the back row, pale and drawn, wearing a simple black sweater instead of her usual power suits. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than I'd seen her since she was a child. "It's time," David said, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze. I walked onto the stage as the lights dimmed, the spotlight temporarily blinding me. The room fell silent as I approached the podium, 200 pairs of eyes watching my every move. I placed my notes on the lectern, took a deep breath, and looked up. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is James Wilson. 3 weeks ago, Aurora Capital acquired Luminary Technologies. Many of you have questions about what this means for your future, for the company's direction, for the work you've poured your hearts into." I paused, scanning the audience until I found Sarah's face again. Our eyes met briefly before she looked down. "I could stand here and talk about market strategies and restructuring plans. I could give you the standard corporate speech about synergies and right-sizing and pivoting to new opportunities." I set my notes aside. "But I think you deserve something more honest than that." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This clearly wasn't what they had expected. "The truth is, I acquired Luminary because I saw something valuable here that was being smothered. Not just the technology, though that has tremendous potential, but the people. The ones who come early and stay late not because someone is watching, but because they believe in what they're building. The ones who speak up when something isn't right, even when it's risky to do so. The ones who value substance over appearance." As I spoke, I felt a strange transformation taking place within me. The distinction between James Wilson, wealthy investor, and Jim Edwards, humble librarian, began to blur. I was simply a man speaking his truth, after decades of silence. "I've spent my life valuing things that others overlooked," I continued, "finding worth in what most people pass by without seeing. It's a skill that comes from patience, from looking beneath the surface, from understanding that true value rarely announces itself loudly." My eyes found Sarah again. She was watching me intently now, a slight furrow between her brows, the same expression she'd had as a child when trying to solve a puzzle. "I believe a company should reflect the best values of the people who build it. Integrity, empathy, a commitment to substance over show, a recognition that what matters most is rarely what shines brightest at first glance." The room was completely silent now, the employees leaning forward in their chairs, some nodding, others exchanging glances. I could feel the atmosphere shifting, from fear and uncertainty to something resembling cautious hope. This was the moment I had planned for, the perfect opportunity to reveal myself, to tell them all that the mysterious investor was actually a simple librarian who had lucked into wealth, to look at my daughter and say, "Sarah, it's me, your father, the man you rejected, the man who never stopped loving you." The words were there, balanced on the tip of my tongue, ready to change everything. But then I saw her face, really saw it. The vulnerability in her eyes, the confusion, the fragility of whatever process of remembering she'd begun. And I realized that public revelation would be for my benefit, not hers. It would be my revenge for her graduation speech, not the reconciliation I truly wanted. So instead, I swallowed those words and continued. "In the coming weeks, you'll see changes at Luminary. We'll be more transparent about our finances and our challenges. We'll focus on building technology that genuinely helps people, not just impresses investors. We'll create a culture where everyone's contributions are valued, where speaking truth is rewarded rather than punished." I stepped away from the podium, moving to the front of the stage. "And we'll remember that there are people here who deserve to be heard, even when they've made mistakes, even when they've lost their way, even when they've forgotten what matters most." My eyes found Sarah once more. A single tear had traced its way down her cheek, though I doubted she was aware of it. Because sometimes the most valuable thing we can offer another person is the chance to find their way back to themselves. I paused, gathering myself. "Thank you for your attention today. Department heads will be sharing more specific plans throughout the week. My door is open to anyone who wishes to speak with me directly." As I turned to leave the stage, I added one final thought, almost as an afterthought. "We have people here who deserve to be heard, even when they make mistakes, even when they get lost, even when they forget what truly matters." I pointed vaguely toward Sarah's section of the room, though not directly at her. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones brave enough to reconsider everything they thought they knew. The applause was hesitant at first, then grew stronger. As I exited the stage, David met me with a puzzled expression. "That wasn't the speech we prepared," he whispered. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. Through the curtain, I watched as employees began to stand, talking animatedly amongst themselves. Some looked relieved, others energized. And Sarah, she remained seated, staring at the empty stage, tears now flowing freely down her face. Olivia appeared at my side. "She's crying," she said softly. "I know. Aren't you going to talk to her?" I shook my head. "Not yet. She needs to come to me when she's ready." But Sarah didn't approach me after the meeting. Instead, she slipped out a side door before I could make my way through the crowd of employees wanting to introduce themselves to the mysterious Mr. Wilson. Later that evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, Olivia knocked on my door. "She left this for you," she said, handing me a folded piece of paper. It wasn't signed, but I recognized Sarah's handwriting immediately. So similar to the childish script in her old essays, yet more controlled, more guarded. The note contained just 3 words: "Who are you?" I carefully folded the paper and placed it in my wallet next to the castle drawing. The question echoed in my mind all the way home. Who was I? James Wilson, the wealthy investor? Jim Edwards, the forgotten father? A man seeking redemption or revenge? Perhaps I was all of these things, or perhaps I was still discovering the answer myself. That night I couldn't sleep. Sarah's question, "Who are you?" echoed in my mind like a persistent whisper. Outside my apartment window, the city lights blurred through a fine mist that had settled over San Francisco, each glow surrounded by a halo that reminded me of how memories soften at the edges with time. I found myself at my desk just after midnight, pulling out a weathered cardboard box I'd kept hidden in my closet for 15 years. It contained the fragments of my life with Sarah, birthday cards she'd made for me, school projects I'd helped with, photographs from happier times. At the bottom lay a blue folder containing every piece of writing she'd ever given me, preserved as carefully as the rare first editions in the library's special collections. The last essay she wrote before Melissa took her away was dated October 17th, precisely 2 weeks before they left. The assignment had been, "What I Fear Most," and while most third graders had written about monsters or thunderstorms, Sarah had filled 3 pages with her greatest worry: forgetting. "Sometimes I forget things," she'd written in careful cursive, "like where I put my shoes or what day we have art class. But what I'm really scared of is forgetting important things, like the sound of someone's voice or how it feels when Dad reads me stories with all the different character voices. Mom says people forget things all the time and it's normal, but I told her if I ever forget Dad, I hope he doesn't forget me." I ran my fingers over her childish handwriting. The blue ink faded but still legible after all these years. How prophetic those words had been. Melissa had systematically erased me from Sarah's life, replacing memories with a narrative that served her purposes. And yet, something had survived, some seed of truth that seemed to be germinating now, pushing through the hard soil of manufactured history. By dawn, I had composed a letter to my daughter. Not an explanation or a defense, just the truth laid bare on the page. I wrote about the library, about the joy I'd found in books, about the nights I'd spent reading to her until she fell asleep. I wrote about the pain of losing her, about the emptiness of the years that followed, about carrying her castle drawing in my wallet every day since. I wrote about McCall and the unexpected inheritance, about Aurora Capital, and my complicated motives. I wrote without expectation or demand, simply offering my truth after years of silence. I slid the letter and Sarah's childhood essay about forgetting into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote her name on the front. Then I drove to the luminary offices before anyone would arrive and left it on her desk. All day, I waited for a response that didn't come. I moved through meetings mechanically, signed documents without reading them, nodded at appropriate intervals while my mind remained fixed on that envelope. Had she found it? Had she read it? Was she angry, confused, moved? The uncertainty was its own special kind of torture. By evening, I was exhausted from the weight of anticipation. I canceled my remaining appointments and retreated to the quiet sanctuary of the library for my regular shift. The familiar routine soothed me, checking in returned books, helping a college student find sources for her thesis, recommending a new mystery to a regular patron. Here I wasn't James Wilson, corporate enigma. I was just Jim, the librarian who knew where everything belonged. As I was reshelving books in the poetry section, Martha approached with a strange expression. "There's someone asking for you," she whispered. "A young woman, she's waiting by the front desk." My heart hammered against my ribs as I made my way through the stacks. Could it be Sarah? Had she connected the dots and found me here in my natural habitat? But it wasn't Sarah waiting by the circulation desk. It was Olivia, her face drawn with concern. "I've been trying to reach you," she said, taking my arm and guiding me to a quiet corner. "Your phone's been off." "Library policy," I explained, the disappointment bitter in my throat. "What's happened?" "Sarah came to see me today," Olivia said, her voice low. "She asked about you, about James Wilson. She wanted to know how long I'd worked for you, what kind of person you were." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're a man of integrity who values substance over appearance. That you're more complicated than people realize." Olivia paused, studying my face. She asked if I knew why you had acquired Luminary specifically. I swallowed hard. "And?" I told her she should ask you that question herself. Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "She left this for you." She seemed agitated, like someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it in front of Olivia, afraid of what it might contain. My name was written on the front, Mr. Wilson, in Sarah's precise handwriting. Did she mention the letter I left or the essay? Olivia shook her head. She didn't say anything about them. But Jim, she went to your office afterward. Security called me because she was in there for over an hour just sitting at your desk looking through your things. A chill ran through me. Was anything taken? I don't think so. But when she left, she asked the most peculiar question. Olivia's eyes met mine. She asked if you still had her castle drawing. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The castle drawing, the one I carried in my wallet, the one only Sarah and I knew about. How could she possibly know about that unless... She's remembering, I whispered. Olivia nodded. I think so. But Jim, memories can be dangerous things, especially when they contradict everything you've believed for 15 years. After Olivia left, I retreated to the rare books room and carefully opened Sarah's envelope. Inside was not a letter, as I'd expected, but a pressed flower. A forget-me-not, identical to the one she'd left on Olivia's desk weeks earlier. Beneath it was a single line of text. "Do you still have my castle drawing?" My hands trembled as I took out my wallet and removed the faded, much-folded drawing I'd carried for 15 years. I stared at it for a long moment. The crooked windows, the impossibly tall tower, the stick figure holding a book that was supposed to be me. When I returned home that night, I placed the drawing and the flower on my kitchen table and stared at them for hours, as if they might speak to me, might tell me what to do next. The silence of my apartment pressed in around me, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the occasional turning of pages as I leafed through Sarah's childhood writings. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow, whether Sarah would confront me with her suspicions, whether she'd reject me all over again, whether there was any possibility of healing the wound that had festered between us for so long. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest, fragile and tentative but undeniably present. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I found your letter. And the essay. I need time." 3 simple sentences that contained worlds of meaning. I didn't need to ask who it was from. I didn't need to respond. I simply closed my eyes and whispered, "Take all the time you need, sunshine." Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing a clear night sky dotted with stars. I stepped onto my small balcony and looked up at the constellation Cassiopeia. The Queen Sarah and I had often found together during our backyard stargazing sessions. The W in the sky, she'd called it. Too young to remember the myth of the vain queen, but enchanted by the pattern of stars. "Remember me," I whispered to the night sky, to the daughter who was perhaps at this very moment remembering a father she'd been taught to forget. Remember us. A full month passed without another word from Sarah. I respected her request for time, though every day without contact was its own small agony. I threw myself into the restructuring of Luminary, working closely with the engineering team to refocus the company's AI healthcare platform on accessibility and affordability rather than profit margins. The work was rewarding in its own way, but felt hollow without Sarah's participation. "She's watching you, you know," Olivia told me one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly projections. "She reads every memo, every report. She's requested the minutes from all your meetings." I nodded, unsurprised. Sarah had always been thorough, even as a child who would question every detail of bedtime stories, looking for inconsistencies or unresolved plot points. "Has she said anything to you?" "Not directly, but she's returned to work. I see her in the hallways sometimes and she always asks how you are. Not in words, but I can see the question in her eyes. On a rain-soaked Tuesday in November, 6 weeks after I'd left my letter on Sarah's desk, David rushed into my office without knocking. "She's requested a meeting," he said, slightly breathless. "Sarah, she wants to present a proposal for Luminary's future direction." The calendar invite just came through. I stared at my computer screen as the notification appeared. Friday, 4 p.m. Just Sarah and me. The subject line read simply, "Moving forward."
Those 3 days were among the longest of my life. I barely slept, rehearsing possible scenarios in my mind. Would she confront me about my identity? Would she pretend nothing had changed? Would she resign? Would she forgive? Friday arrived with painful slowness. I spent the morning at the library, my one remaining shift each week, a connection to my real self that I refused to relinquish despite my new responsibilities. The familiar routines centered me, prepared me for whatever might come.
At 3:45, I sat in my office at Luminary, staring at the rain streaking down the windows, blurring the San Francisco skyline into impressionistic smudges of light and color. On my desk lay Sarah's castle drawing and the pressed forget-me-not, talismans of a connection that transcended the years of separation. When she entered precisely at 4 p.m., I rose from my chair, uncertain of the protocol for this most unusual of meetings. Sarah looked different somehow, softer around the edges, less armored than I remembered from our previous encounters. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual corporate attire, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Ms. Harmon," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please sit." She placed a leather portfolio on my desk, but remained standing. "I've prepared a comprehensive proposal for Luminary's restructuring. It includes a 3-year growth plan, recommendations for our AI ethics framework, and strategies for community health partnerships. I look forward to reviewing it." She nodded, then took a deep breath. "But first I need to ask you something." "Here it comes," I thought, bracing myself. "Why did you buy this company?" It wasn't the question I'd expected. Not, "Are you my father?" Or, "Why did you lie to me?" Just this simple query about business motivation. "Because I saw value where others didn't," I answered carefully. "Because I believed in its potential beyond quarterly profit reports." She studied my face for a long moment. "That's what you said in your speech. But it's not the whole truth, is it?" I met her gaze steadily. "No, it's not." Sarah nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Then, with deliberate movements, she opened her portfolio and removed a photograph I hadn't seen in 15 years. A snapshot of me reading to her on our back porch, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. "You bought Luminary because of me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, because you're James Edwards, my father." Hearing her say it, acknowledging our connection after so many years of erasure, sent a shockwave through my system. I couldn't speak for a moment, could only nod in confirmation. Sarah sat down then, her posture straight, but not rigid. I've spent weeks trying to reconcile the father I was taught to despise with the man I've observed these past months. The librarian who achieved nothing with the businessman who commands respect, the failure with the success. "They're both me," I said quietly. "The librarian and the businessman. The father who lost his daughter and the man who found an unexpected fortune. Mom said you abandoned us, that you chose books over family, that you refused to fight for custody." I shook my head slowly. "I fought with everything I had, but your mother had resources I couldn't match. And then she moved you across the country, changed your school, your phone number. The court orders for visitation meant nothing when I couldn't even find you." Sarah looked down at her hands. I started remembering things after I found my old essay. Small things at first. The way you'd do different voices for characters in books, the constellation games we'd play in the backyard, the forget-me-nots we planted together. "You remembered," I whispered, almost to myself. "Not everything, but enough to know I'd been told lies." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why didn't you tell me who you were that first day in your office? Or during your speech? Why keep pretending?" I considered my answer carefully. "I wanted you to see me, really see me, before you knew. I wanted you to judge the man I am, not react to the father you'd been taught to hate. And the McCall rights? The money? Why keep that secret? By the time the money came, you were grown, with your own life." Would you have believed me if I'd suddenly appeared claiming to be wealthy? Or would you have thought I was trying to buy your affection after years of absence? Sarah was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. Then she reached into her portfolio again and removed an envelope. "I've been writing to you," she said, "every week for the past month. Letters I never intended to send." She slid the envelope across the desk. "This is the only one that matters." With trembling fingers, I opened it and removed a single sheet of paper. It contained just a few lines in Sarah's precise handwriting. "The last thing I wrote before Mom took me away was about being afraid of forgetting you. What I never wrote was why. Because even then I sensed you were the only one who saw me, really saw me. Not as an achievement or a reflection, but as myself. I don't know if we can rebuild what was lost, but I'd like to try." I looked up to find Sarah watching me intently, her expression a complex mixture of vulnerability and strength. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness," I said softly, "or instant trust. Those take time." "Time," she repeated, with the ghost of a smile. "That seems to be the one thing we finally have." We didn't embrace that day, didn't make grand declarations or promises. Instead, we spent the next hour reviewing her proposal for Luminary's future, a proposal that was brilliant, compassionate, and visionary in ways that made my chest tighten with pride. As she was leaving, Sarah paused at the door. "I'm having dinner at that little Italian place on Powell Street tomorrow, 7 o'clock, if you wanted to join me." It wasn't a question, but it was an opening, a small door into a possible future. "I'd like that," I said simply. After she left, I sat for a long time, holding her castle drawing and the forget-me-not, feeling the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak November sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the city. Today, Sarah is CEO of the restructured Luminary. She earned the position through merit and vision, not because of our connection. The company has become a leader in accessible healthcare technology, with initiatives that prioritize underserved communities over shareholder returns. We have dinner every Sunday now, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine. We talk about books and stars and the ethics of AI. We don't talk about Melissa, or the years we lost, or the graduation speech that set our reunion in motion. Those wounds are healing slowly, in their own time. I never told Sarah about McCall's posthumous success, never explained how Aurora Capital came to be, never asked for apologies or offered excuses, but I think she knows, and I think perhaps that's enough. Once a month, I receive an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside are poems, stories, fragments of childhood memories rewritten from an adult perspective, silent acknowledgments of a connection that endured despite everything. And if someday she asks who really saved Luminary from collapse, perhaps I'll tell her the truth. It was a librarian you once knew, a man who believed that the most valuable things are often overlooked, a father who never stopped loving his daughter, even when she forgot how to love him back. But for now, this quiet rebuilding is enough, this gentle reclaiming of lost time, this most beautiful silence between us, not the silence of absence, but the silence of understanding. The silence of forgiveness, the silence of love that needs no words to prove its worth. Sometimes the most powerful form of love isn't a grand gesture or a public declaration. It's the quiet patience of waiting for someone to remember who you truly are. For 15 years, I carried my daughter's drawing in my wallet, preserving the memory of what we once were to each other. I could have used my newfound wealth to force my way back into her life, to demand recognition, to seek revenge for her cruelty. But would that have healed either of us? Would it have restored what was truly valuable, the trust and love we'd lost? What would you have done in my place? Would you have revealed yourself immediately at that first meeting, claiming your rightful place as both father and boss? Would you have held that graduation speech against her forever? Or would you have understood, as I eventually did, that sometimes people need to find their own way back to the truth, that memories, like forget-me-not flowers, can lie dormant for years before suddenly blooming again? If this story touched your heart, please consider following this channel for more stories about family, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways life brings us full circle. Like and share if you believe in second chances, and let me know in the comments what lessons you're taking away from our journey together. Remember, the most valuable things in life are often overlooked. Just like a simple librarian who loved books and his daughter, more than anyone could see.